September 12th, 1943. A hotel fortress sits atop a mountain in central Italy. Inside, one of the most dangerous men in Europe is being held prisoner. His name is Benito Mussolini, Italy's dictator, the man who invented fascism. Once Hitler's closest ally, now captured, humiliated, and heavily guarded. Though that was about to change. A dozen German commandos descend from the sky in gliders, silent and untraceable. At their head, a 6'4", scar-faced man who isn't even supposed to be here. His name is Otto Skorzeny. 10 minutes later, Mussolini is free without a single bullet being fired, and Adolf Hitler has a new favorite. But Otto Skorzeny wasn't just another soldier. He was something else entirely, and his story only gets stranger. To understand how Otto became Hitler's go-to commander, we have to go back. Not to the battlefield, but to Vienna in 1908. Born into a middle-class Austrian family, Skorzeny was the son of a civil engineer. Intelligent, athletic, and fiercely ambitious, he pursued engineering in university. But what truly set him apart was the long, jagged scar down his left cheek, a product of the elite fencing clubs in Austria. The scar wasn't a disfigurement, it was a status symbol at the time, a badge of honor for men who lived by discipline, aggression, and pride. Skorzeny stood out. He was tall, commanding, and fluent in several languages. He was the type of man who seemed destined for something larger than himself. And in the turbulence of post-World War I Europe, he found his purpose in a dangerous idea: fascism. He joined the Austrian Nazi Party in 1931, long before it was safe or popular. By the time Hitler annexed Austria in 1938, Skorzeny was already a true believer. And when the war broke out, he didn't hesitate. He enlisted in the Waffen-SS. At first, the SS kept him in a technical role, thanks to his engineering background, but Skorzeny wasn't looking to draw maps. He wanted action, combat, and attention. In 1942, he was transferred to a newly formed SS Special Operations Unit under Heinrich Himmler. These were the men tasked with the missions too unconventional for the regular army: sabotage, espionage, assassination, black ops before the term even existed. This is where Otto started to shine, who stood out not only for his loyalty, but for his boyish imagination and his absolute willingness to bend the rules. That's why in 1943, when Hitler needed someone to attempt the impossible, rescue Benito Mussolini from a fortress atop a literal mountain, Skorzeny's name came up. He had never flown in a combat glider, but Skorzeny insisted on joining the raid himself, and it was a stunning success. The team stormed the hotel, seized control without firing a single shot, and escorted Mussolini to safety. Skorzeny wasn't even the one who had planned the raid, but he made sure history remembered him as the hero. Mussolini was so impressed, he reportedly asked, "How did you do it?" To which Skorzeny would reply, "Führer's orders." Back in Germany, Hitler was ecstatic. He promoted Skorzeny on the spot and awarded him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, the highest military honor in the Third Reich. But the real reward was fame. Nazi propaganda latched onto the mission like a gift from the gods. Newspapers hailed Skorzeny as the most dangerous man in Europe. His image was broadcasted across the Reich, presented as a modern-day knight in the service of fascism. The myth of Otto Skorzeny had been born, and for the rest of the war, the Nazis would use him not just as a commander, but as a symbol of everything they wanted to be: cunning, bold, and unstoppable. But as Skorzeny's missions grew stranger, more brutal, and more deceptive, something far more dangerous was being made: a man who believed he could do anything he wanted. By late 1944, Germany was losing. The Allies had landed in France, the Eastern Front was collapsing, and Hitler was desperate for a miracle. That miracle, once again, would come in the form of Otto Skorzeny. It was called Operation Greif. Skorzeny assembled a team of German soldiers fluent in English. He dressed them in stolen American uniforms and sent them behind enemy lines in captured US jeeps. Their job was to sabotage, confuse, and break the psyche of the American soldiers. They changed road signs, spread false orders, cut telephone lines, and it worked. Almost too well. American paranoia skyrocketed. The fear ran so deep that American troops began stopping each other at checkpoints, interrogating fellow soldiers to weed out the infiltrators. One of the most bizarre methods was baseball trivia. GIs were asked to name the winner of the World Series or who played for the Yankees. If they hesitated or knew a little too much about baseball, they were arrested. And while Skorzeny slipped away untouched, 23 of his men weren't so lucky. After being captured in American uniforms, they were tried and executed by Allied forces under the rules of war. In military terms, it barely moved the needle, but in psychological terms, it was devastating. The US command in Europe even feared that Skorzeny might be planning to assassinate General Eisenhower himself. They locked him inside his headquarters for weeks, just in case. Skorzeny never even made it behind enemy lines himself, but the idea that he could was enough to paralyze the Allied command. By 1945, Skorzeny was a ghost of the Reich, appearing in a dozen places at once, always rumored to be leading one last sabotage team, one final resistance group. After the fall of Nazi Germany in 1945, Otto Skorzeny was captured by the Allies and imprisoned. But while Hitler was dead and the Reich in ashes, the man once hailed as the most dangerous man in Europe wasn't done making headlines. In 1947, Skorzeny stood trial before a US military tribunal in Dachau in Germany. The charge was violating the laws of war, specifically ordering his men to wear enemy uniforms during Operation Greif. According to the Hague Convention, it was a war crime to use the uniform of an enemy to deceive in combat. If convicted, Skorzeny could have been executed. But his defense had an ace up its sleeve. They argued that his men wore American uniforms only for infiltration, not for direct combat, and they weren't the only ones who bent the rules. The Allies had done the same. British commandos and American operatives had used disguises, impersonation, and even civilian clothing during missions behind enemy lines. One British spy was called as a witness, and he admitted under oath that such tactics had been used by the Allies too. The tribunal deliberated, and in the end, Otto Skorzeny was acquitted. Not because he was innocent, but because by the end of the war, the rules no longer applied to anyone. He wasn't released though. Skorzeny remained interned in a US prison camp in Darmstadt, pending further investigations and denazification hearings. But the clock was ticking, and the war had moved into its next phase, the Cold War. In July of 1948, Otto Skorzeny escaped. Disguised in a US military uniform, he walked straight out the front gate. With the help of former SS comrades and possibly a few silent nods from the people who were supposed to be watching him. When Otto reappeared after the war, it wasn't in a jungle bunker or a South American hideout. It was in plain sight on the streets of Madrid, living openly under the protection of Spain's fascist dictator Francisco Franco. Skorzeny reinvented himself as a businessman. He wrote memoirs, gave interviews, and presented himself as a soldier, not a Nazi. A myth he curated carefully, a myth that many wanted to believe. Behind the facade, he was assembling something far more dangerous, the Paladin Group, which was a so-called security consultancy, but in reality, a mercenary network offering military training, intelligence, and counterinsurgency tactics to other fascist regimes. His clients included Argentina, Chile, and other military dictatorships that ruled with torture and terror. And while he wasn't always on the front lines, his fingerprints were on operations that crushed dissidents and propped up fascist rule. He also had ties to Odessa, the rumored post-war SS escape network that helped former Nazis disappear into South America. Whether Odessa was real or exaggerated, one thing is certain: Skorzeny moved in the same circles, and he helped many of his old comrades find new lives in new regimes. In Egypt, he trained military forces and consulted on missile projects, many of them aided by ex-Nazi scientists working under President Nasser. And that's when Otto Skorzeny's past finally caught up to him. At a quiet cafe in Madrid, two men sat across from him. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't have to. Skorzeny knew who they were. According to later accounts, Skorzeny assumed he was going to die. He had spent years looking over his shoulder, and now two agents from Israel's most feared organization were sitting across from him. Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad, was running a covert campaign to stop Nazi scientists from helping Egypt build long-range missiles that could hit Tel Aviv. They needed names, addresses, routines, and they believed Skorzeny could deliver them. He didn't say yes immediately. He wanted protection, assurances that Israel wouldn't come after him later. He reportedly asked for his name to be removed from the most wanted lists, and he wanted money. Then he was given his first task: assassinate a fellow Nazi working in Egypt. Skorzeny reportedly carried out the murder himself to prove he wasn't bluffing, personally shooting a German scientist who was helping Egypt. That act of violence violence sealed the deal. But not everyone at Mossad was comfortable. One of the agents who helped recruit him later refused to shake his hand. He did the job, but he didn't want to pretend that this man was anything but what he was. So what do you call a Nazi officer who trained fascists, killed scientists, helped Mossad, and built a private army? In the Cold War, you called him useful. Otto Skorzeny never apologized, never faced justice, and never hid. He would be buried in 1975 in his hometown of Vienna.